misunderstood books in the Bible because of the content. And so I don't want to get too much into it because I have to wait till all the platforms are caught up. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day planned. Good morning to Lindell and Pam on the church page so far. And let's see if Facebook is, well, it's not going to be quite up just yet. But I remember reading this as a young man, years and years ago. The first memories I have with this book are quite confused. I'm not quite sure what am I supposed to learn from this book? What is my takeaway? And I hope that today maybe we could learn a little bit more about that. And so it looks like we are just about up and running on all platforms. Are we there yet? No, not quite yet on Facebook. So Song of Solomon, firstly, is written by Solomon, sometimes called the Song of Songs because of the first line. So, debate on whether they ought to name it. In verse 1 of chapter 1, it says the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And so some call it, the King James calls it Song of Solomon. Others call it Song of Songs. It does not self-title, so I don't have a dog in that fight. But the reason it starts with the name Song of Songs is that's an old Hebrew, literary mechanism, like King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Sinner of Sinners. It would be a way of putting whatever the object of that statement is as the epitome of that thing. So Solomon writes a song, and he says, this is the song of all songs, Song of Songs. That's kind of the idea. All right, so let's talk briefly. Now, we've got the whole book. The Daily Walk guys decided we're reading the whole book today. 8 chapters, maybe the longest reading we've had, so we can't stop and talk about a lot, which may be best to keep me out of trouble. This book is, firstly, it doesn't read this way for us. It doesn't translate super well for us to understand that it's poetry, all right? So if you pick up a book of poetry in a bookstore, it's so important to know what kind of literature you're reading, right? If I pick up a novel, I would expect there to be a story that begins and then ends. It begins at the start and ends at the end, right? That's how you expect a story to work. If you pick up a legal document, you understand at least, it might not be riveting, exciting, but you know what it is that you're reading, and so it informs the way you interpret what you're reading. If you pick up a book of Proverbs, that's what we have recently read. You read it with this understanding, okay, these are power-packed statements. They may not be related to the next one or the one before it. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And they're there to inform me of general good truth. Song of Solomon is a book of poetry. If you grab a book of poetry, it may be a collection of love songs or love poems, okay? Poetry, songs were kind of synonymous. That's why you kind of get the clue with it's called song. Why is it called song? It's because the whole book is all poetry. But it's not one poem. It's a collection of poems. And so if you were writing an outline of the book of Solomon, Song of Solomon, you would be stretching the meaning of the book to try to make too much connection between all of the chapters. It's more like a book that's a collection of poems, and they stand alone. They're to be read and enjoyed and understood singularly rather than all together. So a lot of people have taken Song of Solomon and tried to okay, here's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and draw lines and try to make contextual connections. And I don't believe that is necessarily the intent. All written by the same guy, and there are similar characters throughout. All right, so that's the idea. You have an introduction, you do have a conclusion, but everything in the middle is sort of fluid. You've got several different poems. Next, important to know, is this theme that's been running through the wisdom literature that Solomon wrote. We've got to keep Ecclesiastes and Proverbs in mind if we're going to have a chance at understanding Song of Solomon. All three of them, like I said, it's kind of like a diamond where it's the same thing. It's just got so many different faces that you can analyze from different angles. So Proverbs is very optimistic. Ecclesiastes is pessimistic. Song of Solomon is idealistic. Okay? So let's start in the order that the Bible has given us. Proverbs. All of it, all three of them, you've actually got to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay? All the way back to the beginning of man's existence, of humanity, and then the beginning of Solomon's career as king. Okay? Firstly, the beginning of man existence. Garden, God created man in his own image, and there's Adam. And God said, this is not good. Of all things. I mean, God made everything good. He said, but this is not good. What's not good? It's not good that man should be alone. So he made a helper for him. A helpmeet is the English. This helpmeet is not like an assistant, like your caddy. But the definition, and then you see it fleshed out in the Bible, this helpmeet is a completer, an essential other, the one who makes what's not good, good. And two become one flesh, equally important, different roles, but very, very critical. This is pre-fall, by the way. This is before the fall, obviously. So now you have Adam and Eve walking around in the garden. A couple key characteristics. One, they're naked. And the Bible makes that one of the first things it tells us because it's important for the rest of biblical history. Man and woman, in love, God calls it good. He tells them to reproduce. He gives them these missions to work for him. And really the mission that God gives man is bigger than Adam and Eve are capable of. Name the animals, tend the garden, replenish the earth. I mean, like they've got a big job to do, and they may be full-grown adults, but they're the only adults who could say, look, I wasn't born yesterday, and that not be true. Like they literally were just created, and so they are relatively blank slates here, okay? They don't have history books to read. They don't have any textbooks. I mean, it's just Adam and Eve and God, period. That's it, and nature. So Adam and Eve, they have this thing where daily they walk with God. In the cool of the day, the Bible says. And God is instructing them. He's talking with them. He's communing with them. And they're getting instruction about how to exist, how to fulfill their roles. But then there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that they're tempted with. And Satan wants them to eat of it because he knows the consequences. He understands that in the day that they eat thereof, they shall surely die. Well, Eve's temptation, as she looks at the tree, she noticed that it was desirable to make one wise. So she takes it. She eats it. She shares it with Adam. What's the first thing that happens? Firstly, they are ashamed of their nakedness. That's the first thing that happened. When sin happened, the first relationship affected immediately at the moment was this husband and wife. Nakedness was shameful. They didn't trust each other anymore. There was a relational shattering, very obviously displayed in the clothing problem, which actually is important when we're talking about modesty. This is why it's important all the way back in the Garden of Eden. Because of sin, because of evil intention, because of wickedness in everybody's heart, we need to protect ourselves by covering ourselves. That's the main motivation for modest clothing. But, so now we have a shattered relationship between man and woman, which turns into, or probably starts out with, a shattered relationship with God. Okay, so the rest of the Bible is a rescue story of God reconciling man to himself. Okay, so that's that. Now zoom into Solomon's life. As he begins as king, God looks on him with favor. and tells him, whatever you would request, I will give it. What do you want? And what does Solomon say? He says he wants wisdom. Just like Eve, looking at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that it's desirable that one would be wise. It is very profitable. It's something that one would desire. So Eve decided to acquire that wisdom in her own means. So she takes to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, rather than going directly to God, who she walks with daily, and say, I would like wisdom, God. So she tries to acquire wisdom because it's desirable in sinful ways, and what you have is death and destruction. Solomon, in a way, reverses that scenario. And when God asks him what he wants, he says to God himself, may I have wisdom? This pleased God. And what happened was a flourishing of Solomon's life until it wasn't. Because when you get wisdom from God, things flourish. Things are good. God is wise, and his wisdom brings life. But Solomon blew it because he was lifted up, and he goes and he decides, okay, I've got it from here. And he starts defining wisdom on his own terms again. Essentially, he stops trusting God, and he takes to the tree himself. And so you watch this really high peak of Solomon's life just start a downward spiral. And so you've got the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, which are the digest of a man who has experienced both sides of Eden in a way. He has experienced the blessing and benefit of wisdom from God, and he has experienced the destruction and death of not walking with God. And so we really have sort of end of life great wisdom from a person who's done incredible things, both good and bad. All right, so Proverbs. It's personified as this lady wisdom, and he's imploring his son to marry her, to go be one with wisdom, to get her to forsake the strange woman and all the others who would tempt you, the enticers, like Satan, like the serpent in the garden, and this strange woman, like the desire that is to make one wise. Just reject all of that, son, and just marry Lady Wisdom. So he personifies wisdom as a woman. And what we get in Song of Solomon is a similar idea, only it's personal, and it's Solomon, and he is being pursued by this lady. So yes, it's graphic. No, it's not bad. God created these things. But like I said, Proverbs is very, very, optimistic. Ecclesiastes, pessimistic. Song of Solomon, idealistic. Think Garden of Eden, how wonderful it must have been, and how wonderful it will be in heaven, okay? I know I've talked a lot, but Song of Solomon has been so misunderstood. We need to get some of this background and understand it. So what we have is love literature. This is man and woman. This is pretty graphic. It does talk about physical intimacy, and we ought not to be too embarrassed about that. It's something God made and he called good. And so we're going to read about it, but if you imagine this idealistic love poetry written by Solomon from the perspective of the lover, the woman, this is the way it ought to be. Men and women, married people today, this is the way it ought to be. It's not the way it always is, because when we sin, it's crazy to think this way. Okay, Eve takes the fruit, Adam takes the fruit, and they look at each other, and the first thing they notice is, good night, I'm naked, and I need something to cover myself up. I don't trust her. She doesn't trust me. Our intentions are no longer always good and pure and simple. It's astounding the effects, okay? Here's where we enter into some territory that people might be uncomfortable with. The effects on your intimacy, married couple, that personal sin has. When I sin, it affects my relationships. Sin always separates. And if it's true love, agape, the stuff that God gives, sin is going to push that away. Sin separates us from God, but sin separates us from humanity, from those around us. Sin always isolates and imprisons, okay? So the idealistic love poetry of Solomon, let's read it with Eden eyes. Think of the Garden of Eden. Think of the way it ought to be, the way God made it to be. And then contrast that with most relationships in this world, and you'll see the importance of pursuing the Lord for wisdom and not this earth's fake versions of intimacy or cheap versions of love. So let's read now. Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. Because of the savor of thy good ointments, thy name is as ointment poured forth. Therefore do the virgins love thee. Draw me, we will run after thee. The king hath brought me into his chambers. We will be glad and rejoice in thee. We will remember thy love more than wine. The upright love thee. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me because I am black, but because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. Tell me, O thou whom my soul loveth, where thou feedest, where thou makest thy flock to rest at noon. For why should I be as one that turneth aside by the flocks of the companions? If thou know not, O thou fairest among women, go thy way forth by thy footsteps of the flock, and feed thy kids beside the shepherd's tent. I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels, thy neck with chains of gold. We will make thee borders of gold with studs of silver. While the king sitteth at his table, my spikenard sendeth forth the smell thereof. A bundle of myrrh is my well-beloved unto me. He shall lie all night betwixt my breasts. My beloved is unto me as a cluster of camphire in the vineyards of En-gedi. Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes. Behold, thou art fair, my beloved. Yea, pleasant. Also our bed is green. The beams of our house are cedar, and our rafters of fir. You think of Adam and Eve, what that must have been like prior to the fall. How simple and beautiful that marriage must have been. I mean, seriously, like that, just to think about that is astounding. And it's kind of, this helps me think of that as I read the first chapter. Please don't forget that this is poetry, okay? Poetry is flowery language. Sometimes it's a little bit lofty, using a lot of similes and comparisons and analogies. So, what was her teeth were, I can't remember. Oh, thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels. Okay, he likes her teeth. Good job. So that's poetry. So it's challenging you to think metaphorically a lot of times, but some beautiful language used here. And just how so intimate Adam and Eve must have been. I mean, not only because they loved one another, but because they were the only ones around. I mean, just Adam, just Eve. And they were you wanted to talk? You've got Eve. You don't have the buddies pulling you away. You don't have anybody else calling your name. I mean, it's just you and her, and that must have been pretty awesome. All right, chapter 2. I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. This reminds me to bring up. So some have struggled with Song of Solomon. Okay, there's some bad perception that sex is something to be ashamed of, and it's been preached that way from many pulpits. I've got a lot of quotes from pastors. I'm talking about generations past, and it's seeped into current generations some, where at least sex is something that we ought to just keep very hidden. We never talk about it. Even in marriage counseling, it's never brought up in many circles, where it's like, this is like sort of a deep, dark secret. Like, we know how kids are made, so let's just not talk about it. And it's weird. I mean, mankind, have come up with all kinds of weird perceptions of what sex is all about and all of that. So there's a lot of perversion out there. And perversion is not always to over-enjoy sex. Perversion is also to ban it, to, like maybe the Catholic Church or others, to forbid talking about it, to downplay it, to this is something that God made. And one of the first things God said was not good was that man was alone. He brings a woman, and not 100% of that relationship, but a big part of that relationship was sexual. And God said, this is good. And so what God has called good, let not man call bad, okay? So this is good stuff we're talking about. But with the uncomfortable feelings that a lot of people have had reading the Song of Solomon, they have attempted to make it into an analogy or an allegory. So one of the allegories that is most prominent would be to assume that we're talking about Jesus the whole time. And this is a love story between Jesus and the world. And even though it's graphic, it's just trying to show that Jesus loves the world very much. Jesus is called the Rose of Sharon and the Lily of the Valleys. And I don't think that it's not talking about Jesus, or that it doesn't help us apply that. But I do believe it's poetry about a man and a woman. And, you know, if we take the whole Bible in perspective, God is love. So all love that we talk about, even the relationship between a man and a woman, is God-given, God-sourced. And then, so you look at Jesus Christ, who comes because of the love of God, and he calls the relationship between himself and his church as though he's a groom and the church is the bride. Even so much so that in Ephesians, Paul says to husbands and wives, tells them about their roles and that they need to love one another and be submissive to one another. He goes right ahead and connects Christ and the church. And so we can read Song of Solomon and make good application that the woman in Song of Solomon is the church and that Solomon himself is Jesus. But I think that's a small view. I think we need to have a bigger picture here. We're talking about love in general. We're talking about marriage and Christ in the church. It's kind of all the same in a sense. It all comes from God. And so we can make applications like that. But I do believe that the primary intention of the book is for us to know what's right, what is ideal in a marriage relationship. Chapter 2, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. As the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. As the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Stay me with flagons, comfort me with apples, for I am sick of love. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand doth embrace me. I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up, nor awake my love till he please. The voice of my beloved, behold, he cometh leaping upon the mountains, skipping up upon the hills. My beloved is like a roe or a young hart. Behold, he standeth behind our wall. He looketh forth at the windows, showing himself through the lattice. My beloved spake and said unto me, Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of the singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. Turtle, dove is what's implied here. Verse 13, I used to just laugh at that as a kid, Oh, so romantic, turtles, Verse 13, the fig tree putteth forth her green figs, and the vines with the tender grape give a good smell. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. O my dove, that art in the clefts of the rock and the secret places of the stairs, let me see thy countenance, let me hear thy voice, for sweet is thy voice, and thy countenance is comely. Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feedeth among the lilies. Until the day break and the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved, and be thou like a roe or a young harp upon the mountains of Bether. Chapter 3. By night on my bed I sought him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. I will rise now and go about the city in the streets, and in the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. The watchmen that go about the city found me, to whom I said, Saw ye him whom my soul loveth? It was but a little that I passed from them, but I found him whom my soul loveth. I held him and would not let him go, until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her that conceived me. I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up, nor awake my love till he please. Who is this that cometh out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all powders of the merchant? Behold his bed, which is Solomon's. 80 valiant men are about it, of the valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man hath his sword upon his thigh because of fear in the night. King Solomon made himself a chariot of the wood of Lebanon. He made the pillars thereof of silver, the bottom thereof of gold, the covering of it purple, the midst thereof being paved with love, for the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth, O ye daughters of Zion, and behold King Solomon with the crown wherewith his mother crowned him in the day of his espousals, and in the day of the gladness of his heart. Chapter 4. Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes within thy locks. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead. Thy teeth are like a flock of sheep that are even shorn, which came up from the washing, whereof every one bare twins, and none is barren among them. Thy lips are like a thread of scarlet, and thy speech is comely. Thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate within thy locks. Thy neck is like the tower of David, builded for an armory, whereon there hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Thy 2 breasts are like 2 young roes that are twins, which feed among the lilies. Until the day break and the shadows flee away, I will get me to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. Thou art all fair, my love, there is no spot in thee. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Shinir and Hermon, from the lions' dens, from the mountains of the leopards. Thou hast ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. How fair is thy love, my sister, my spouse. How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all spices. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, camphire with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices. A fountain of gardens, a well of living waters and streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come, thou south. Blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden, eat his pleasant fruits. Chapter 5. I am come into my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. Eat, O friends, drink, yea, drink abundantly, O beloved. I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled. For my head is filled with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night. I have put off my coat. How shall I put it on? I have washed my feet. How shall I defile them? My beloved put in his hand by the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him. I rose up to open to my beloved, and my hands dropped with myrrh, and my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handle of the lock. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had withdrawn himself, and was gone. My soul failed when he spake. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. The watchmen that went about the city found me. They smote me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took away my veil from me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if ye find my beloved, that ye tell him that I am sick of love. What is thy beloved more than another beloved, O thou fairest among women? What is thy beloved more than another beloved, that thou dost so charge us? My beloved is white and ruddy, the chiefest among 10,000. His head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy and black as a raven. His eyes are as the eyes of doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks are as a bed of spices, as sweet flowers. His lips like lilies, dropping sweet-smelling myrrh. His hands are as gold rings set with beryl. His belly is as bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. His legs are as pillars of marble set upon sockets of fine gold. His countenance is as Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet, yea, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Before I continue reading, another thought as we read some of these things, and I'll be careful not to over-explain some of the analogies spoken of here. It's just not it's really not live stream material. And I do believe, we need to be relatively open about sex. It's not wrong for us to talk about it. It's not even wrong for unmarried people to understand it. You see example after example in the Bible. The Bible does not hold sex quietly. It really doesn't. And not just in the book of Song of Solomon. Many times in the Bible, you get graphic explanations of sexual encounters. It's a very normal thing, is what I'm trying to say. It's a very normal thing in the Bible, and we've often made it something that it ought not to be. And one of the problems that brings up is for young people who get married, a lot of issues, sexual issues in marriage that are never dealt with, because who do you talk to about this sort of thing? So anyway, beside that, as we read how open they are with one another, I mean, quite open. They are not a shy couple. We'll just say that. This is an ideal picture. This is how it ought to be. This is how God created it to be, open and trusting and in love and completely enamored with the beauty of your spouse, because God made that person and God made that beauty and that intimacy and that joy and that pleasure. That's all God made. That's all stuff God made. But we're talking about people who are in a fallen world. What was the first thing that happened between the first married couple ever? As soon as they sinned, they didn't trust one another. They covered up. We know that they had kids later on. So, I mean, that didn't mean that they didn't have sexual intimacy, but it does mean that things were affected quite dramatically. But it's interesting in the marriage relationship, when things are right, I would be you should be, because of your sinful nature, not because of what God has given you, but because of our sinful nature, we would all be embarrassed to walk down the street naked. In fact, we have figured out, our government has figured out that, okay, this is so shameful that we would arrest somebody if they did that. We would arrest them, lock them up. We would fine them, or I don't know what the penalty is for that sort of thing, but we would never do that. You don't do that, okay? That's shameful. But it's not shameful in the marriage bed. And I don't mean that it's not punishable. I mean that it's not shameful, that it's actually the opposite. You see the freeness and openness. They wouldn't be like this with others. Solomon has married many, many, many people, okay? So this is, take that with a grain of salt. But he's talking about the ideal relationship. It's a beautiful thing. What I'm trying to say is when a man and woman are together, it's just like Agur said in Proverbs chapter 30, that there are some things that are just so perfect. It's just you can't hardly comprehend how perfect they are. And he talked about the skill of a snake on a rock. To him that was just beautiful. I think he mentioned a ship in the sea, that like, how does this heavy thing stay afloat? This is something that only God's nature could fix and deal with, or whatever. And then he mentions the way of a man with a maid. It's just a little bit of Eden, and it's just a little bit of heaven when a man and woman are able to put off the shame of their garments and not have shame in nakedness. And this is a ideal This is a picture of heaven, how beautiful it must have been in Eden, how wonderful it will be in heaven, how all of the effects of sin are just gone, finally. Like the song says, saved to sin no more. Saved not only from the power of sin, but from the presence of it. What a beautiful truth that will be, or that it is, that we will be able to experience one day. But the marriage bed is one place where the wrong is right for a minute, for just a little bit of time. Clothes are not necessary, and shame is also not there. And that's right, and that's good, and it's beautiful. All right, continue reading. Chapter 6, Whither is thy beloved gone, O thou fairest among women? Whither is thy beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with thee? My beloved is gone down into his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed in the gardens, and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He feedeth among the lilies. Thou art beautiful, O my love, as tears of comely as Jerusalem. Terrible is as an army with banners. Turn away thine eyes from me, for they have overcome me. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Gilead. Thy teeth are as a flock of sheep which go up from the washing, whereof every one beareth twins, and there is not one barren among them. As a piece of pomegranate are thy temples within thy locks. There are 80 queens, and 80 concubines, and virgins without number. My dove, my undefiled, is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of her that bare her. The daughters saw her and blessed her, yea, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her. Who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners? I went down into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley, and to see whether the vine flourished and the pomegranates budded. Or ever I was aware, my soul made me like the chariots of Amin-Nadib. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon thee. What will ye see in the Shulamite? As it were the company of two armies. Verse 13 there kind of gives us a little bit. We don't learn a lot about this woman other than her passion for her lover and for Solomon's description of her body, but we don't really know who it is that he's talking about. But we do know where she's from, Shulamite, okay? Chapter 7, How beautiful are thy feet with shoes, O prince's daughter, the joints of thy thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a cunning workman. Thy navel is like a round goblet which wanteth not liquor. Thy belly is like an heap of wheat set about with lilies. Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins. Thy neck is as a tower of ivory. Thine eyes like the fish pools in Heshbon, by the gate of Beth-rabbim. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon, which looketh toward Damascus. Thine head upon thee is like Carmel, and the hair of thine head like purple. The king is held in the galleries. How fair and how pleasant art thou, O love, for delights. This thy stature is like to a palm tree, and thy breasts to clusters of grapes. I said, I will go up to the palm tree. I will take hold of the boughs thereof. Now also thy breasts shall be as clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy nose like apples. And the roof of thy mouth like the best wine for my beloved, that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to speak. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Let us get up early to the vineyards. Let us see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grape appear, and the pomegranates bud forth. There will I give thee my loves. The mandrakes give a smell, and at our gates are all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. Wow, and so as we're imagining and thinking of this ideal relationship, in verse 13, it brings up the mandrakes, which, do you remember, I don't know, just my mind goes back to Rachel and Leah and Jacob. What a broken relationship they had. Firstly, God gives man one woman, and so when man takes more than one, it's messed up, it's not right, and it complicates things. And Jacob's life was a complicated life. And so if you remember, Rachel was the desired one. Leah is the one who he was given by Laban. And so he's bummed out about that and ends up working another 7 years for Rachel? What must that have felt like to Leah, knowing that we haven't moved away from Daddy's house because for 7 years Jacob is working to get married to another woman. Like the first 7 years of your marriage, that's the entire working relationship. Is like, we're here until Jacob can finally get my sister. That's weird. So he finally gets Rachel, and Rachel is not able to have children. And they're taking turns sleeping with Jacob, right? And so turns out Jacob ends up with Leah more often than not because she is giving him children. So she's just having all these babies, and Rachel can't seem to get a piece of Jacob, and she wants to keep trying. So she has a harvest of mandrakes, fruit. And she basically bribes Leah to let her be with Jacob for the night by giving these mandrakes. And so the fruit of the garden, if you're finding the analogy, the background from Eden, the fruit is, again, the thing that is being leveraged, that that seeks to put a wedge between intimacy between a man and a woman, and that's not the way it ought to be. When I eat fruit, I tend to laugh, especially good fruit, like if it's ripe and it's just delicious. I tend to think like, man, who can eat a peach like this and think that God is not good? I believe that these things, like God made honey, God made peaches and apples and grapes, and he must have wanted us to enjoy something. And so you've got in this story, fruit is brought up a lot. Fruit and honey, fruit of the vine, wine or juice, so like this is like the food that they're consuming when they're on a date, right? The mandrakes are brought up. And finally, these mandrakes aren't used in a way to divide man and woman, but there's something shared. The beauty of God, the pleasurable fruit of God is being consumed and enjoyed within that relationship. So anyway, I see a lot of connections that one could talk about. But chapter 8, Oh, that thou wert as my brother, that I sucked the breasts of my mother. When I should find thee without, I would kiss thee. Yea, I would not be despised. I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house. Who would instruct me? I would cause thee to drink of spiced wine of the juice of the pomegranate. His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that ye stir not up, nor awake my love until he please. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree. There thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bare thee. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. For love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be contemned. Before I read on, verse 6 there, Jerry, I think you're still watching today. I remember being in Jerry Lee's vocal ensemble in the Tillamook High School, and we sang some pretty awesome songs. I loved being in the vocal ensemble. I learned so much. I enjoyed being, it was basically a 16-voice choir. And one of the songs we did was based in this text right here. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. What a beautiful song that was. Maybe, Jerry Lee, would you... We've only got a few more minutes. Do you have a link to that, like on YouTube? Could you post that in the comments? That would be fun. People would be able to listen to that song. It would make the most sense after reading Song of Solomon. That song that we sang in the vocal ensemble would be the most poignant, I think. But anyways, no big deal if you can't. But if you can, copy a little link in there, and we could all listen to it. That'd be nice. All right, let's just go to verse 8. We have a little sister, and she hath no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she shall be spoken for? If she be a wall, we will build upon her a palace of silver. And if she be a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. I am a wall, and my breasts like towers. Then was I in his eyes as one that found favor. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He let out the vineyard unto keepers. Every one for the fruit thereof was to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard, which is mine, is before me. Thou, O Solomon, must have 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof 200. Thou that dwellest in the gardens, the companions hearken to thy voice. Cause me to hear it. Make haste, my beloved, and be thou like to a roe or to a young hart upon the mountains of spices. Wow, the ideal picture of a husband-wife relationship, and it's a beautiful thing, something to be commended and longed for. Let's see. Oh, goodness, my computer died. That's a bummer. I thought I had more charge than that. Well, if Jerry posted, great. I have no idea. So anyway, I assume there were comments today. I'm bummed out. I would like to be able to respond to those, but sorry, computer died. Can't do it. So I guess that's it. That is it. So we began. So we just concluded. I don't know, two sort of categories of biblical literature. The one category specific that I was talking about was we call it wisdom literature, which, has been, these are just man's classifications, okay? Wisdom literature includes the writings of Solomon, okay? And the point of all three of them, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, is wisdom's effects on flourishing life. And that's why you've got the ideal picture of this relationship between Solomon and his beloved. When wisdom is pursued and embraced, the way God presents it, God's wisdom, everything flourishes in such beauty. Ecclesiastes, when I pursue everything else in my own wisdom, doing that which is right in my own eyes, it's all vanity. So Proverbs sort of stands to me as it's like Ecclesiastes is the warning. Song of Solomon is the goal, like the beautiful picture of how human relationship even can flourish when we pursue the wisdom of God. And Proverbs is like the big call to action. So get wisdom, buy it, sell it not. Don't you want the beauty of Eden? Don't you want the passionate love and the flourishing relationships? He could have wrote Song of Solomon about friendship. He could have wrote Song of Solomon about father-son relationships. He wrote it about a man and a woman because that's all the way back to the Garden of Eden. That's the first human relationship. So he writes Song of Solomon to show how wisdom makes a human relationship so elemental, like husband and wife, to flourish in ways that would blow your mind. So buy wisdom, church. Get wisdom. It will help your marriage. It will help your relationship with your kids. It will help you in everything. As Eden flourished in the beauty of God's holiness and sin destroyed it, so get God's wisdom. Don't define it on your own terms. But we also just finished a broader section of the Bible we would call poetry, or I guess just poetry. So that would include the book of Job and Psalms. So you got Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. So those 5 books are poetry mostly, or Proverbs wouldn't be poetry, it'd be, but a type of literary device that it would be, poetic, if you will. So anyway, we begin now a long section of the prophets. They are divided into 2 subsections, the major and minor prophets, which maybe isn't the most useful of terms. Minor prophets makes them seem like they're less important. They're mostly labeled by the size of the writing, okay? Major prophet is because they're longer books. So we begin Isaiah, which is a major prophet. It's a long book of the Bible. And then like Haggai is not less important. It's just small. So we call it minor prophet. So we'll get into all of that later on. Let's pray. Thank you for hanging in there with me today in Song of Solomon. I hope that it's been, with all of the background, I hope that we're able to get a picture of what he's trying to accomplish in his wisdom literature. And I hope that you've been challenged through his 3 books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. You can either have a vapor, smoke, vain sort of life and existence, or you can fear God and keep his commandments, and you can watch your life flourish like in Song of Solomon. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. What a beautiful thing it is. And I pray that we would grow, that we'd be nourished by it. I pray for the relationships in our church. I mean, the marriages, I mean, the friendships, all the relationships that we have. Lord, that we would see your wisdom benefiting those relationships. Father, I pray that we would understand the importance of our daily walk. And I don't mean the label of the book that we're reading. I mean the action of walking with you together, letting you define wisdom for us rather than defining wisdom in our own eyes as Eve did. Lord, we benefit so much from the writings of Solomon as he's seen both sides of it. He's seen the benefits and the flourishing of having the wisdom of God and how that's benefited his life so much. And then he's also felt the deadening effects of doing that which is right in his own eyes. So Lord, I pray that we would pursue you and forsake our own way, that we would trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not to our own understanding in all our ways, that we would acknowledge you and let you direct our paths, lead us beside the still waters, anointing our heads with oil, letting our cups run over. Lord, such a beautiful picture it is of people who are submissive and teachable of your wisdom. I pray that you help us to pursue that in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, I will see you tonight at 7 o'clock. I'll be sending out a fresh Zoom link. Don't go with any Zoom link you've used in the past. Go with the email today. I don't know why, but I lost the prayer meeting Zoom link, so it's going to be a fresh new thing. That doesn't change much. You just click on the link, but just so you know, I don't know if people save those things and click them again and again, but just grab the email today, and that should work out. Okay, guys, I'll see you tonight.